Hey everybody, Bobby Moore here. Good morning and welcome to my Power of Connection broadcast for a LinkedIn live stream. I'm here every day at Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to talk about topics around entrepreneurship, personal branding, thought leadership, professional speaking, startups, career development, all that kind of stuff. And today's topic is about storytelling. So we'll get into it in a moment. But first of all, I'm just going to load up the slide, load up the to see your feed, and then also why don't you guys share kind of if you're joining me, where you're from, and what your thoughts are on storytelling. I want to get a sense of kind of where you guys are at, but let me know where you're from. First of all, I'm from Toronto, Canada, home of the Raptors, in case anyone wants to know. And yeah, let's get into the storytelling piece. Storytelling is something that it's something I use all the time because I am a professional speaker and I use it a lot in my work as well as in some of the things that I'm currently working on. So let's dive in here and let me get the feed here. Okay, so all right, so. Welcome everybody. So, there's people here. This is great. Thanks for the. I'm glad you had the interview. I've already secured another interview next week. I'm going to be lasagna is better than linguine. That's the truth, Max. Just letting you know. And again, you can ask any question below in terms of what we're talking about. You can also share your own questions or your own insights on what we're doing. If you think someone else should be part of this message, this whole discussion, tag them below, share them on your post, whatever you might want to do. That would be great. Really appreciated. So let's get into storytelling. So storytelling I use all the time in my business as a speaker, absolutely, because it connects people in a way that a lot of people don't really realize, right? So, but stories have been something that we've been telling to each other since the dawn of time, right? So parents would tell children their stories about their father or something they did, which then shares a lesson and what it does for them. So it's been going on for a long time. Now in business, same thing. Way back in the day, there was some sort of let's call it a peddler who was selling their wares, and they were telling a story about how their product this person was struggling with their product, and this fantastic hair remover. I had this friend Bill came up to me and he said, "Hey, my hair is falling apart. I don't know what to do about it. Here, you just take my hair." I mean, obviously, I'm making this up, but like he was telling a story about how their product serviced that person and helped them out, and how they changed as a person, and that's a story in itself. And I use stories all the time to illustrate some sort of point, whether it's a personal point or whether it's a professional point. I'm not sure any of you heard my cheeseburger story, but essentially the cheeseburger story is one I use to talk about innovation and opportunity, and it's actually a real story versus people who tell fake stories. I mean, some people say, well, what about a fake story? Is that okay? Well, there are fables and there are stories that may not necessarily be true, but like fairy tales, but they still often have a lesson and they still often can capture an audience. I also know some people who think the stories are not that relevant. I mean, what I would say with that is stories are helpful, but you shouldn't always tell stories. I mean, sometimes it's a matter of just laying out the information and the content, right? So if I want to tell you my top 3 tips for networking, I can tell them to you 1, 2, 3 without a story. But if I tell you a story about each tip, that's probably better, right? So when I did my talk with Hasten Hustle last year, and Gary Vaynerchuk was there, and it was an awesome conference, I gave my 3 top tips for networking. But in doing so, I told a story too to really illustrate the point. I find that when I speak, data helps, and stories help, and case studies help to really drive home the point about what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to say. And so those stories definitely helped in terms of letting people know here's why these 3 points are so impactful, because there's a story related to it, right? So one of the things about stories, for those who don't know how stories work, let's break it down into a few things. Now, why story is so important? Well, stories tell people more than what you're saying. So stories can reflect your belief system. They reflect your values. They reflect a lesson. They tell you how people change and how people are. It gives you a glimpse or a perspective of the world. It most importantly, stories are relatable. No matter what story I tell. So when I talk about cheeseburgers, I talk about being a university. People get it. When I talk about meeting my wife, that's a story that people can relate to. When I talk about my children, it's a story people can relate to. When I talk about being frustrated with my boss or dealing with a work situation that was difficult, people can relate to it. So stories ultimately are extremely relatable, and that's why it's so good to use stories. Yeah, and people are coming in here now, giving some great comments. David says there's a better chance of people remembering you when what you told them if you put in a story. Yeah, because stories actually create more relatability and memorability. Glenn says stories are helpful in business and life. Many times it's easy to make it easier for your audience, whether it be one person or many. That's right. That's good. Lots of people today, which is great. Thanks, guys. So stories are all very relatable. Stories often have a lesson, stories are also a way to be creative. It's a way to animate yourself or your situation. Maybe you're talking about something that's really highly technical. Maybe you're talking about something that many people might think is boring. Obviously, people are interested in lots of things, and there's things that don't interest us. So, for example, I'm personally not interested in, let's say, car mechanics. I'm not interested in financial analysis. But I remember watching a TED Talk by my friend Preet Banerjee, and he talked about financial analysis, things like that. And I was like, it was so good. But he had these stories to make it relevant to me, and I was like, wow, I'm listening. This is really good. And he really found a way to cut through my kind of limiting belief about, oh my God, financial analysis is so boring. But he really made me see how important it was, and that's great. And yeah, Natalie makes a good point, which is, storytelling is something that I also do to teach young people. A lot of young people, when it comes to interviews and things like that, they want to be able to use stories to, illustrate their points. In fact, when I tell stories in interviews, or when I train people with interview speaking, is you can tell stories that are business related. So they'll say, tell us about a time that you struggled, and so you talk about this obstacle with work, and you talk about. So typically with stories, you say, well, here's the situation, right, and then here's the actions that I took, and then here's the result. That's kind of the general idea for a story. And in doing that interview, you let people know exactly what the result was, but also showing who you are and what you're capable of. And even in interviews, I'll also say that you can also talk about stories in a way that are personal, because even in a professional business interview, a personal story is very relatable. So, for example, when people ask me about something I've struggled with, I'll talk about my health or my weight. I'll talk about trying to find marrying my wife and convincing my parents. Like these are stories that people can totally relate to when it comes to how to do a really good story, right? And so when it comes to, for me personally, I typically like to have a story in almost every talk that I'm doing. Now, on LinkedIn, I've been doing those 1-minute tips. They don't always have a story. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Because in 1 minute, it's very hard to put a story and have the main takeaway that you're trying to do. But sometimes there is one, right? A quick 30-second story. In other longer videos, a 3-minute story, and something like this, I could tell even longer story. So hope you understand that aspect. Now, let's talk about storytelling, and the reason I'm talking about storytelling, actually, and I might as well mention this, is that next week we are doing an event in Toronto for the next Toronto LinkedIn local meetup, and the theme is storytelling. Storytelling presenting live and online, and so we're going to teach people how to tell stories online, how to tell stories live and in person, and how to deliver stories for their professional career, right? So it's going to be a great panel of great people. There's going to be Jennifer Ettinger, Nina Penner, Yash Devadkar, Fabio Marama. Hope I don't forget anybody. We have a talk I'll be hosting. There's going to be a talk by Jennifer Ettinger as well as Tara Hunt. It's going to be pretty rock awesome. So we're really excited of having this panel and the keynotes. There's also been an open mic where we're going to feature Mark Elwood, as well as other people are going to speak and share their own stories. So it's an opportunity to do that. It's on Tuesday next week. Make sure you check that out. Okay. And meanwhile, again, let me know what people are asking questions here, but let me know what you think about stories and what are some of your tips for stories. Any specific question you have for me in terms of how to become a better storyteller. I am doing a storytelling workshop within my Master Video community, so I'm going to teach them how to do better at stories. That one's focused on video, because speaking on video versus speaking on stage is different when it comes to storytelling. Speaking in front of for a business presentation is different than when you're doing it like on a keynote. So it's important for people to know the difference between those different things. Now let's see here. The post a link. Here's some questions, right? And again, if you're liking what you're hearing, you like this post, like the topic, share below, share your comments, tag people, share us on your own posts, and let people know about what we're doing, what we're talking about. Marianne says, Bobby, will you post a link to the LinkedIn meetup? Yeah, so actually, because I'm doing live stream, for the first time ever, I'm planning to live stream the entire thing. So if you're around and you want to watch, I'm going to try to plant my tripod and camera in a nice place where we can do the entire panel and the keynotes. And so I'm going to actually do it that whole evening. So it'll probably start around 6:30, 7 o'clock. 6:30 probably is the best time, and then I'll probably be live streaming it. So I'm super, super excited about that. All right. And people are sharing. Thank you. Oh, those good people. Hey, Brian, Tommy, Abdul Qadir. That's good. I like that Abdul's just sharing his link. That's good. If you want to get people to look at your link, though, Abdul Qadir, you better give some people some context in terms of why you put that there. And so let me tell you the basic structure of a story. How about that? Let's get into that. So if you want to put together a really compelling story, like right away, the first thing you want to do is you want to talk about the situation. The situation, who the characters are, what's the environment, how are people feeling, what's going on, setting the scene. Now, sometimes it can take a while to set the whole scene. Like, well, when I was a kid, I grew up and I had, a brother and sister, and it can be this long thing, right? It could also be one that's like very compelling, like, I was 35,000 feet in the air and our airplane was nosediving, and boom, right away you capture the audience. Like, what's next? And they want to know what's going on. And so, there's different ways to do that in terms of capturing the story. But ultimately, you set the situation, right? And then once you do that, then you talk about, okay, what is the conflict? There's going to be some sort of rising action, and then there's going to be some sort of conflict. Now, most stories have the simple stories have a conflict that has to be overcome, and then the story evolves so that they overcome that one. Longer stories have, struggle, crisis, overcome. Struggle, crisis, overcome. Struggle, crisis, overcome. And they keep building it up to, and there's an overall big problem they're trying to, like if you look at Avengers Endgame, right? I mean, the entire movie franchise is all about storytelling, and Tony Stark has a story, and Captain America has a story, and Scarlet Witch has a story, and they all have stories, and they all have different conflicts they're trying to resolve. And what was amazing about that entire movie series is that they resolved almost tons of different storylines into one entire series and then the movie, and that's actually pretty powerful stuff. But as the story goes, there's rising action, rising conflict, and then finally, when you have the rising action, you need to resolve the issue, and then you have the denouement and what happens afterwards. And then the most important thing with your story is you have to make it very clear what's the moral or lesson. Like, what exactly are we trying to learn from this story? And from that, how did people change? How did the characters change? Did you change the person? Did the people that are in the story, did they change as people? And what exactly happened to them? And from that, that's where you get the lesson, the value, the morals, the beliefs, the insight that people want from your story, right? So that's really the general idea in terms of, how to put together a really fantastic story. And, if you have struggles or things you're, not sure how to do about a good story, by all means, you can put them down below, and let's take a look. I'm happy to answer questions regarding stories. In the meantime, I can certainly tell you some of my big quick stories. I'll tell you the cheeseburger story. Okay, so the cheeseburger story is essentially, I was in university. I was studying for exams in winter. It was very cold. It was late, and as I was coming home, I was starving. So I decided to go to McDonald's. And I went to McDonald's, and all of a sudden I noticed they have this special sign on saying, "Hey, cheeseburgers for 79 cents." Now, normally cheeseburgers at that time, because I'm older, they were about $1.50. And so I was like, wow, what a great deal, 79 cents. That's almost half off. So I decided to get 3 cheeseburgers, and then I said, maybe I'll get 6 cheeseburgers because, I'll take it up to my res and I'll put it in the fridge, and then I'll nuke them the next day, and I'll have more cheeseburgers. And then something hit me. I was like, you know what? And I said, I will have 20 cheeseburgers. And she looks at me like, what? 20 cheeseburgers? Like, yes, 20 cheeseburgers, because I had this big idea in my head. And then she said, well, that'll take about 20 minutes. I'm like, okay, no problem, I'll wait. So then my head went again, oh, you know what? And so I started heading over to another McDonald's, which is probably about 3 to 5 minutes away because there's many downtown Montreal. And so I went there and I ordered 20 cheeseburgers as well. Then I went back to the first one, picked up my cheeseburgers in two big bags, which I put in my backpack. Then I went over to the other McDonald's, picked up the two cheeseburger bags, and then I called a cab. So I called a taxi and I drove up to my residence, which took about 5 minutes. I was going to walk home, but it was a 15-minute walk. But I took the cab because I had so much to carry. So I went up there, and my idea also was very time sensitive because it was getting late. It was like 10:30, 11 p.m. at night, so I want to make sure I leveraged it. So when I got on campus, onto the residence, I then went to everybody and I said, okay, hey guys, who wants a cheeseburger? $2. And I sold, I kept six for myself. Remember, I wanted six. Three I ate and three I kept. And the other 34 cheeseburgers I sold for $2 each. That's like, what's that? That's $68, right? And I spent half that. And so what's the lesson here? The lesson here is opportunities everywhere. And if you can be innovative and you can see the opportunity, you can cash in on it, or at least take advantage of that opportunity. That's what happened to me. And again, thanks for all the likes and hearts. I really appreciate that. That's really sweet. That's what I kind of did, and I did that twice. But then the effect kind of wore off, and then I stopped. But it was opportunity doesn't have to be like this big thing. Like I made $1 million or I made $50,000. Sure, I made like $50. But still, the story is about innovation, about opportunity, about creativity, about insight, about being entrepreneurial, right? That's what the story is all about. So there you go. So in that story, you can see how I mentioned. I mean, there wasn't much of a conflict. The conflict was I was hungry, and the conflict was also that people were hungry during exam time. So I took advantage of that situation, and it was late at night. So but there was a rising action, and there was a whole kind of idea that there's opportunity there. So that's really the main lesson of that story. All right. So, if you have stories too, I'd love to hear. It's a good question. Allie's like, that there began your entrepreneurial journey. Actually, my entrepreneurial journey began probably when I was a kid. Essentially, I used to collect raspberries and blueberries with my friends, my cousins and stuff, and then we would sell them in the neighborhood. That was my first entrepreneurial thing, I would say. I also did junior achievement in high school in grade 10, 11, 12, where we'd go run a business as students. So for me, that was a lot of fun. So I've always had the entrepreneurial thing as part of my thing. And also, the biggest story I told everyone on LinkedIn Live actually was the first LinkedIn Live broadcast I did. I talked about my entire story of my career and how I became where I am today. And so now, when it comes to storytelling, often when I'll do a keynote, I'll often start with a story. Like start the entire keynote with a story, as opposed to doing a story to illustrate some sort of specific situation. I'll actually tell the story right away. Sometimes I won't. Again, depends on the audience, depends on the content. But I definitely insert storytelling into every single thing I do, and I think all of you can too. And I'll share another brief story, which is when I was in corporate, and I was doing marketing for grated cheese. Okay, so Kraft grated cheese and Parmesan and shredded cheese, things like that. And we would always meet every month. We'd meet with the team, with the different cheese people. So the Cheese Whiz people and the Philadelphia cream cheese people and the block cheese people and everybody else. And we would get together to talk about business results. And one of the things my boss told me at the time, he's like, Bobby, I know this stuff's pretty dry, right? Because not too many people care about grated cheese, right? So he's like, so what you got to do is try to find the story. What's the story? And so he encouraged me to try to turn it into this really great story. So I would come in and I was okay, guys, here's the story today. There was a 99-cent sale in the No Frills, and you know what happened? 30,000 pounds of consumption this way, and that's the big story because we drove 3%. And I talked about the whole story of that month. And that's really what it was all about. So it worked very well for me in terms of doing the story. So so that's kind of something that I do when it comes to stories. Now, if you have dry material, it's hard to think about that, but you have to find a way to make it personal to you and personal to your audience. If you want to be a good storyteller, always think about your audience, right? So, who they are, what they care about. So, and if you can craft a story that actually adheres to, what they care about and what they would enjoy, then that works really, really well. And another thing to talk about stories is some other things I can talk about is setting the stage in terms of imagery, right? So having imagery behind you in a PowerPoint can be really compelling. You can also, for example, You can have props. So you bring out your guitar and you tell a story, or you bring a frisbee because your story's about frisbee. Props can work really, really well. Humor, I use a lot of humor in my stories. Now, some don't do that. What I would say for humor is a very fickle thing. So if you want to know whether you're funny, you have to get feedback from people, right? So, I would always, tell stories, and often it would be funny. And sometimes people say, wow, that was hilarious. Now, I wasn't planning to be hilarious. I threw in a couple of nuggets, and some of them I just, I can be witty, but hilarious? Okay. It's an interesting feedback, but I know over the years I've got that, so I know I can do funny stories. And I also know the ones that hit home. Like when I do my networking keynote, I have stories in there that I've been using for like 10 years, but they're gold every time I do it. So if you want to use humor, you have to make sure you get feedback on it, because you can't assess yourself to be funny. You have to get other people to assess you to be funny. Okay, that's really important. Okay. Meanwhile, if you have any other questions or comments or things you want to talk about, by all means, comment below. Let me know what you think. If you have questions, or you want to share something that you're up to. I mean, today, what day is today? Today's Thursday. Yeah, today's Thursday. One thing I will mention is that in doing these LinkedIn lives, I'm going to actually do a few adjustments that I'm working on. So one is I'm planning to do at least one interview per week. So now if you know someone that wants to be interviewed, that would love to be interviewed, then tag them below, message me or whatever, and then let's see if we can get them in for an interview. Right now I'm only doing local, like people in Toronto, but I'm going to be testing another app probably this weekend or probably this weekend or next weekend on how to do remote interviews. So we'll see. But I want to do at least one interview per week. I'm going to do Wisdom Wednesdays. I'm also thinking about doing a couple of short videos, short LinkedIn Live videos. Like instead of my 1 minute tip that I would do like on my regular videos, the uploaded ones, I'll do like maybe a 5 minute kind of quick chat in the afternoon. So somewhere like 4:30 p.m. today, I'll do the same thing. I'll just do a little chat. Hey guys, boom, boom, boom. So I might do that, a little surprise, because I want to make the most of this LinkedIn Live. I think that it's a good way to help people, and it's very easy for me to help people with the content that I'm talking about. So I think I'd love to be able to help people as much as I can. So that's kind of the reason why I'm thinking about doing that. I might try different locations and try different locations. The problem with cafes, though, they're often noisy, and so my home is much more quieter. Marianne, yeah, listen, if you want to be on my show, let's do it. Like, I think it's great because it's an opportunity for us to share insights with people and get people to share their stories, share their insights. Yes, I can certainly talk every day, and I've lost to share, but part of this is about you. Part of this is about your engagement, your questions. When you guys ask questions below, that adds to my content, and I do appreciate that. So it's important to keep that in mind. And the format I'm doing for the morning, so every day 8:30, the format's pretty much the same. I talk for 10-15 minutes. I then will interview people, or I'll answer your questions, and have a little banter and try to keep it under 30 minutes. But usually they're 20 to 25 minutes, I've noticed. All right, so we all have stories, right? And a lot of us struggle with stories, but it's important for you to know what they are, that they work. And I'm hoping to encourage you to use them, whether you're doing it as a speaker, whether you're using them in your business presentation, whether you're using them in a video. These are all things that you can use stories to your advantage. And there's ways to improve yourself and work on it. And the biggest way to improve yourself is practice. Another way is to get a coach or work with teams, work with people. But if you again like this content, share it with your friends, tag people. I'd love to get more people involved. I'd love to interview people, so you can tag them, particularly ones in Toronto. So let me just scroll here, see if anybody did I miss a question. There's some good, interesting ones about your first job blueberry picking at age 12, Natalie. I like that. That's good. Hey, wait, you're from New Brunswick? That's where I'm from. I grew up in New Brunswick actually, so I was blueberry picking in St. John, New Brunswick. So that's kind of random that the second blueberry picker is also from New Brunswick. That's awesome. Let's see. Okay, some good stuff here. Okay, great. And again, if you also, this is great, Natalie's and Marianne. Like if you meet people on the feed, connect with each other and talk to each other, and hey, let's get connected. I think that's really awesome. And Tommy keeps commenting on the same thing. Haha, I love it. Okay, that's good. that's really good. Marianne, your third watch and you really enjoyed them. Thank you. I appreciate that. What do you think of made-up stories for purpose of illustration? Well, again, yeah, someone said, well, made-up stories are inauthentic. They're fake. No. Fairy tales And there's tales of like, old tales, particularly like traditional tales of different cultures that, you can say, well, that's not true. uh, tales of Santa Claus or Easter Bunny, or tales of fairy tales, Goldilocks and Three Bears. But the point is, these stories have lessons that are used, right? So it's important for you to recognize the difference, right? There are stories that are not necessarily true stories, but they still are impactful stories because they tell a lesson. If I tell or even the books that I read, like I read books to my kids. If I, there's a book over here about this about the star that fell from the sky, and I tell my kids a story. It's a beautiful story, but it's not real. But it has a lesson. It has beautiful characters. They're going through certain things, and it's very powerful, and the kids love it. So to me, like, having stories like that is totally fine. You shouldn't think that morning Bill. You shouldn't think that stories that aren't necessarily true are bad stories, right? Now, there are people that may tell stories to coerce or to tell lies, whatever, and that's sometimes my kids can tell doozies, but at the same time, I'm like, wow, that was a great story. Much respect, but you're still in trouble because I don't believe you. So that can definitely happen. But that's a great question. It's a great question. Well, yes, Vinny, part of it's intent. Part of it is the manner in which you do it. Part of it's the messaging. It all comes together to create the good story, right? So that's really what it's all about. All right. Well, it looks like we're near the end of our time. If anybody has any quick last questions, you can comment below and I'll take a look at it. Otherwise, again, storytelling is something that is immersed in every aspect of life, business, personal, you name it. We tell stories, in our relationships. We tell stories for work. We tell stories on stage. We tell stories in our cultures and all our different communities. So it's important for you to get better at storytelling and do that. And if you do want to get better at storytelling, I highly recommend either. I mean, you can certainly, if you need more support from me, like, I have content for career development. There's my Patreon page for speaking. There's my Ray Allen and my Ray Allen account. There's also my speaker mastermind group. If you want, if you want more storytelling stuff, there's also some things via the Master Video Program, and then also for personal branding, there's DYPB. So you can check those things out and let me know if you have any questions around storytelling, and I'm happy to engage. And I'll see you guys tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for my next Power Connection broadcast. And thanks, David, for sharing that story about Stephen King and Goosebumps. That's really good stuff. Oh, Eric's here. Wow, look at that. So many people. All right. Well, again, if you missed this, you can certainly watch the replay. It'll be in my profile. You're welcome to take a look at that. All the best. Take care, and I'll see you tomorrow.